free agent options that could help replace Marcus Williams if lost this offseason. Kodi Burns' track record looks like good news for a potential Treyquan Smith return. But first, with Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson off the veteran quarterback market, what's next for the New Orleans Saints at quarterback? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, USA Today's Saints Wire, Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And as the New Orleans Saints veteran quarterback market possibilities continue to dwindle, Jameis Winston seems to be the number one option for the team. The New Orleans Saints have been going into this offseason hoping to be able to find that next quarterback that they're looking for in terms of taking over the reins in 2022. They had a nice 7-game stretch, or let's say 6 and some change game stretch with Jameis Winston last season, going 5-2 in games in which he started, including one game that he wasn't able to finish, of course, where the ACL tear happened against his former team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so now there was a whole bunch of conversation at the beginning of the offseason about where the Saints would go in terms of the trade market when it comes to wide receiver. But unfortunately, that trade market doesn't look like it's going to really kind of generate at all. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is going to be staying in Green Bay for how long, we don't yet know. The original report was a 4-year, $200 million contract. He followed that up by saying, hey, yes, I'm sticking around in Green Bay, but any idea of how long or the terms of the contract that are being reported are premature. We're still working on a contract, all that stuff. Russell Wilson, fortunately, did have a trade market, but unfortunately for the New Orleans Saints, they never really got the chance to be a part of it this offseason because the Denver Broncos, where he was sent yesterday for 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, a 5th-round pick, and 3 players, including a starting defensive tackle, a young quarterback in Drew Lock, who probably might not really get much opportunity in Seattle, honestly, and then a tight end with a lot of upside as well, and Noah Fant. That's the haul that it took to get Russell Wilson and a 4th-round pick to Denver, and Denver was the only team that he was willing to go to and willing to waive his trade clause for. And they've been working on that deal reportedly for the last 2 weeks. So New Orleans never really even got the opportunity to be a part of that post Sean Payton. And that was one of the big things that we talked about when it came to Russell Wilson is, are the New Orleans Saints still of interest to Russell Wilson without Sean Payton, or was Sean Payton the big selling point there? Now you still have Michael Thomas, you still have Alvin Kamara, whose, by the way, proceedings in terms of his court case for the altercation in Las Vegas have now been pushed to April 25th. So it'll be just before the draft that we really get an update on what's going on in that entire situation. So for the Saints, the 2 big fish are no longer in the pond, and now they have to figure out where they're going to go. Now, like I mentioned, Jameis Winston seems to still be keenly in the crosshairs as the number one option for the New Orleans Saints. Mickey Loomis mentioning that Jameis Winston, of course, is an option, and they hope that they're an option for Jameis Winston as well. Remember, Jameis should have a bit of a market out there between Pittsburgh, who didn't get Aaron Rodgers, between Indianapolis, who's planning to move on from Carson Wentz. You look at the Washington football team, who didn't get Russell Wilson, even though they put in an offer because Seattle was already negotiating with Denver at the time. And then even the potential reunion for Tampa Bay, even though Bruce Arians seems to have put the kibosh on all of that, there's still going to be a market for him. And I kind of agree with Ralph Marlborough, who said, that it's going to be one of 2 things, that either Jameis is going to get an $80 million contract out of nowhere in legal tampering, or it's going to be a 1-year prove-it deal, right? I mean, we're going to have to see how his market materializes. But for the New Orleans Saints, who are some of the other options? We've talked about Teddy Bridgewater. People hate when we talk about Teddy Bridgewater, but listen, Teddy was able to do it before, and he did it with the help of Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas was going to be there. Yes, Sean Payton is not the coach, but the system will be mostly the same. So play calling really becomes sort of the thing there. But I mean, a lot of people have been telling us this entire time that play calling under Pete Carmichael Not really that big of a deal, not that much of an issue. He's been calling plays off and on since his tenure. So Teddy Bridgewater still an option. But we also got a little bit of an update from Jane Slater, who tweeted out earlier today from NFL Network, reporter there, mentioned that Jameis Winston's still on top of the list, but that also a draft guy like Kenny Pickett, we'll come back and highlight that, Deshaun Watson, considering how his legal proceedings might move forward or whatever's going to happen with that on Friday. Honestly, the way that this has gone, it doesn't look great for him, but we'll get more information on Friday. And then a wild card that was brought up last year and has been brought up again this year is Mitch Trubisky. Now, Mitch Trubisky spoke on the Adam Schefter podcast saying that New Orleans would be a great place and that he'd be very happy to end up there. But I think he's pretty far down the list for New Orleans Saints when they think about their potential starters for next year. I think the familiarity of Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater puts them over the top. And then potentially even a rookie quarterback or a trade for a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo would be above Mitch Trubisky, I would imagine, for the team. And then, of course, if Deshaun Watson ends up being cleared and they find out that all 22 of his accusers are lying or whatever, then all of a sudden he becomes a good option as well. So we'll see which way the New Orleans Saints end up going at quarterback. But the one that's really interesting to me is Kenny Pickett's name popping up here. I don't know if you're, for folks that have been around for a while over the course of the offseason, and remember, we do these every day, so come back. But we talked about Matt Corral, who consistently gets mocked to the Saints. And one of the issues for me with Matt Corral is that he doesn't meet the 7 quarterback commandments that the Saints usually go by. Now, they might not go by that, right? Those are the things where you're looking at, winning at least 30 games, starting at least 30 games, winning at least 23, having a 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, at least a 60% completion percentage, all of these sort of like benchmarks that you have to hit in order to be a premier draftable quarterback. Now, Ian Book hit all of those. But some other quarterbacks and some other players that the Saints have been interested in didn't, right? Patrick Mahomes didn't, but Patrick Mahomes was clearly a generational talent to some teams coming into the NFL. Kenny Pickett checks all the boxes. He's got 8.5-inch hands, but he checks all the boxes. And so it makes a lot of sense that he would be that person. He also scored over a 9 RAS score, which means that in the Saints metric, which the Saints don't use RAS, like, let's be real. They're not going to a free analytics thing and saying, oh, this means this, but they're using their own metric that's probably cranking out similar things, because if you have a good 40, you have a good vertical, you have a good broad jump, you're going to end up scoring well athletically, regardless of what metric you use. So with that being the case, Kenny Pickett could be the option for the New Orleans Saints. Now, it could be tricky, right? What do the Seattle Seahawks do now that they have the 9th overall selection? What happens in front of the Saints at 18? If they don't land a quarterback in free agency that they want, they might look to go to the draft. And if they do that, that might require them trading up. That could cost them a first-round pick from next year. Do you believe in this quarterback class enough to pass on next year's quarterback class in the first round? Lots of questions to answer there for the New Orleans Saints. But the one thing that we do know is that, unfortunately, that veteran quarterback market that we were expecting to materialize when it came to the trade market just hasn't. And for the New Orleans Saints, that means it's Jameis Winston, another familiar option, or potentially dipping into this year's draft. And the Saints are going to be looking to replace more than just the quarterback this offseason, potentially. I mean, we know they're going to be looking at wide receiver, tight end, a couple of other positions, but offensive line and free safety in particular end up running the risk of becoming a little bit more of a need for the New Orleans Saints, depending on what happens specifically with Marcus Williams. So we're going to look at a few free safeties that you should know about, that you want to keep an eye out on if Marcus Williams ends up getting that big contract elsewhere. We'll talk about that, and we'll get to Kodi Burns and what he has done with wide receivers in the past and what it might mean for a Treyquan Smith return as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to all that, I got to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. And let me rephrase, I get to tell you about Built Bar because these protein bars are absolutely delicious. Yes, they are protein bars, but they're not chalky. They don't taste bad. They taste like candy bars. I don't know how it is that Built Bar does this, but they have found a way to make something good and good for you. And it's not just like your grandma lying to you about the broccoli. Like, it's not about that. They actually get it done. And that's their focus, right? You talk about like the Built Puff bars, which are these protein-infused marshmallow bars that are covered in 100% chocolate. They focus on making these taste good first, then they figure out how to make them healthy. That's how you get protein-infused marshmallows. Never been done before. Built Bar did it, and they're absolutely phenomenal. Churro, you've got a whole bunch of, banana cream pie, some fantastic flavors that you could check out, as well as all the standard flavors as well for your usual protein bars like mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, so on and so forth. So go and check them out. Get yourself a box of your own. over at Built.com. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, so you can get 15% off. That's 15% off with the promo code LOCKED15 at Built.com. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, we are here with you 5 days a week, and I appreciate you so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to check out that Locked On NFL YouTube channel as well. Went live last night. We had 9 of our local experts breaking down the Aaron Rodgers return, the Russell Wilson trade. You can only get that stuff over on the Locked On NFL YouTube page. Go and check it out. So I want to talk about free agent safeties that can replace Marcus Williams if he ends up leaving this offseason. And honestly, when you think about the way that the free safety position is played in the modern era of the NFL, there are not bad options out there for the Saints. They're not Marcus Williams, but the drop-off is something that you'd be willing to take in today's NFL. Remember, today's NFL safety is all about playing in the box, coming down, crashing down, making tackles in the run game, all of that. You still want somebody that can make, good plays in the passing game and all that. And Marcus Williams was absolutely one of the best in the NFL at that. Jesse Bates as well, I think you could probably throw in there, who got the franchise tag from Cincinnati. But when you look at some of this other talent that's going to be available on the free agent market, there are some, replacing Marcus Williams is going to be tough to do, right? So I want to be careful about how I phrase this, because you're not really going to be able to replace Marcus Williams, but you can find somebody that within the scheme of the defense can serve the role similar to what Marcus Williams did. Maybe you have to change some stuff. Maybe you play a little bit more split safety out there. Maybe you play and that's where a guy like Tyrann Mathieu becomes more applicable, right? If the Saints do go after Tyrann Mathieu, which there are a lot of reports of mutual interest there, if Marcus Williams does depart, maybe that's not necessarily so much about replacing Marcus Williams as it is about rotating with Malcolm Jenkins, somebody that can play in the box, give you the Malcolm Jenkins role, but that can also serve some split safety responsibilities for you. So there's a lot of different ways to look at the way that the Saints could potentially go down this path of replacing Marcus Williams. I'm going to go over 3 options for you, including one in-house. We'll get that one out of the way first because you know who that is. But if you want to see 2 more options, head over to Saints Wire. John Sigler added a couple of other options as well. So I want to start off with PJ Williams, the in-house option, and probably the in-house favorite to replace Marcus Williams if he returns to the New Orleans Saints himself. They're going to have to sign him, right? He's headed to free agency. He's done a couple of these, quick, cheap 1-year deals with the Saints over the past couple of seasons. Is he willing to do that again? I don't know, but are you also willing to pay him a little bit more based upon an expanded role as a free safety? Probably. Yeah, absolutely. You certainly should be. So if you're going to give somebody an opportunity here from in-house that's going to be able to step up and take over the starting role, why not the guy that has backed him up at that role over the course of the past few seasons? He played well there at the end of the 2020 season, played well there at the end of the 2019 season, played well there when asked to play there in 2021 as well. So he's done it quite a bit. He's revitalized his career away from sort of the experiment that didn't work with him as he first came into the NFL as an outside corner, revitalized his career as a slot corner, revitalized his career again as a deep safety and as a rangy guy. And he's got good size, good speed, which is able to be something that allows you to utilize him as a center fielder, right? Or a single high safety, right? The last line of defense. He struggled a little bit in some cover 4 situations. He struggled a little bit in some split safety situations. But I think that a lot of that has to do with the role that he served more than those roles, which is usually playing in the box, playing in the slot, playing in tight spaces. So you're having to switch responsibilities in terms of what it is that you're able to do. And sometimes the game moves a little bit faster than you can when your directions, when you're sort of looking at what it is that's developing in front of you while your role is changing. So that's a big thing. But I think that would be something, working him there full time over the course of the offseason, all of that would help to prepare him for that. And I think that he would do well there. And he'd be a bargain for you at the position, especially with the rate that the position is now moving, where free safeties didn't used to get paid, only box safeties did. Now, free safeties starting to get paid as well. I'm going to go to 2 other names here that are outside of the organization, both of which, if you were with me last year during the offseason, you heard me talk about when the New Orleans Saints were potentially losing Marcus Williams last season. And these are going in order of priority to me, second, first priority, right? So we're going to go in reverse order a little bit here. So I want to start off with Quandre Diggs, the safety from Seattle. So he is expected to be medically cleared in June, right? He's coming off of an injury, as is our number 1 option as well. So something to watch with both of these guys. But he is, according to John in his article here, ranking amongst league leaders with 11 interceptions since 2019. So ball skills, which is something that you want from those deep, rangy free safeties. Now, Seattle right now, after trading away Russell Wilson, has already told Bobby Wagner that they're not retaining him. maybe they don't bring back Quandre Diggs as they sort of engage in this rebuild with all of these, fresh new selections that they have, and maybe Drew Lock at quarterback for a little while. We'll see what happens there. But if he gets the opportunity to join another team that's going to be in a far less competitive division now, then all of a sudden that gives him an opportunity, Quandre Diggs, to arrive with the New Orleans Saints. There was an article that came out, I believe today, around the 31 to 32 ranking most to least interesting teams for NFL free agents, and it lists the New Orleans Saints at 32nd, dead last, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. There's no way that New Orleans and their phantom salary cap issues are a worse landing place than, say, the Houston Texans. No offense to my guys over at Locked On Texans, John Hickman, Cody Davis. I love y'all. Cody's actually a Saints fan anyway, but I can't with that. That's a little bit too much. So I think that they would be appealing specifically right now because of the division that they're playing in amongst anything else, if nothing else, along with, Dennis Allen and a phenomenal defense. And getting to be a part of that defense should be a big draw for my number one free agent in terms of the guy that could potentially replace outside of the facility, Marcus Williams. And you've heard me talk about him before if you were with me last year. Marcus Maye, the safety from the New York Jets, he got the franchise tag last year along with Marcus Williams. Unfortunately, his 2021 season on the franchise tag didn't go as well as Marcus Williams did. His ended up ending with an Achilles injury halfway through the season, which stinks. But he should be able to get back, and he should be able to be ready for camp, should be able to be ready for the beginning of the season. Achilles injuries, I just wrote about the Achilles injury that hampered Ronald Curry. I just wrote about that over at Saints Wire today as well. Back in 2000 and, I don't want to make him older than he actually is. But, the mid 2010s or whatever, or mid 2000s and all that. And so he ended up getting into an opportunity, a situation there to where it kept recurring. Achilles injuries, as we've seen with guys like Sheldon Rankins, as we've seen with guys like Cam Akers, not as high a re-injury factor nowadays as there was then. So when you look at somebody that could come in and play a pure free safety role and not step on the toes of a Marcus Williams or a CJ Gardner-Johnson, then obviously Marcus Maye fits in there as well. Now, Tyrann Mathieu can be on this list also, just so that I make sure that I say his name again. It depends upon what it is that you expect Tyrann Mathieu to do, because 308 free safety snaps last year as compared to Marcus Williams' 922, it's a little bit of a far venture from what it is that Tyrann Mathieu has been asked to do in his past. So would he be able to shift to Marcus Williams' role permanently? No, but how the New Orleans Saints deploy their defense based upon the talents that are available would be the bigger question if they went that route. And if they're able to also return PJ Williams, then Tyrann Mathieu doesn't become a one-to-one replacement for Marcus Williams, but he becomes an integral part of that New Orleans Saints secondary in a bunch of other ways. So those are a couple of free agents that you can take a look at. There are a few others over at Saints Wire, so you can go and check that out, saintswire.usatoday.com. Coming up next, we're going to dive into our early look at Kodi Burns, right? So we wanted to take a look at the archetypes of receivers that he has helped improve in college and try to compare that to archetypes that might match New Orleans Saints' possible wide receiver room next season. We have our first of this series tonight or today in our final segment of the day, where we're going to talk about Tre'Quan Smith and how he could potentially see the same type of growth as a guy like Darius Slayton did in college, which would be helpful because Darius Slayton is kind of who everyone hoped that Tre'Quan Smith would be. So let's talk about that as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode with a quick look at New Orleans Saints' new wide receivers coach, Kodi Burns, and the types of receivers that he worked with at Auburn, as well as at Tennessee, that he helped to develop, and what type of archetypes and what type of sort of prototypes that might apply to within the New Orleans Saints' potential wide receiver room in 2022. And I want to start with Tre'Quan Smith, because Tre'Quan Smith has not lived up to expectations since being drafted in the third round of the 2018 NFL Draft. He could be back in a New Orleans Saints uniform in 2022. He is set to be a free agent, but there is one of the most immediate comparisons between what Kodi Burns did positively for a receiver that is much like the expectation of Tre'Quan Smith in the work that he did with Darius Slayton, who was drafted in the fifth round of the 2019 NFL Draft. And when he was selected, he came in at 6'1", 194 pounds. You talk about Tre'Quan Smith at 6'2", 210 pounds. So pretty close to being those prototypical wide receivers. Now, just to be clear, we're going to do this kind of one receiver at a time and then turn this into a bit of a series over the course of the offseason, because Kodi Burns helped to turn around quite a few wide receivers, and there are quite a few wide receivers that could be in the New Orleans Saints wide receiver room in 2022. So instead of trying to cram all this in, let's take our time and then go sort of prototype by prototype, archetype by archetype. So When I look at this, and I look at Darius Slayton and his usage in Auburn, the thing that stands out to me the absolute most is where he was being targeted. So let's get to the raw stats first. I hate doing this, but we'll do a little bit of box score reading for just a moment. 15 receptions, 292 yards, and a touchdown in Auburn in 2016. He then jumped 29 receptions in 2017, 35 receptions in 2018, and he moved up to 643 yards, 5 touchdowns, 670 yards, and 5 touchdowns. The things that never changed about him, though, were his averages: 19.5 yards per catch, 22.2 yards per catch, 19.1 yards per catch. So he was always somebody that was a bit of a field stretcher, it would sound like. But if we go back to Darius Slayton's 2016 usage with the Auburn Tigers, only 25% of his targets, which again were not a lot of targets, but still 25% of that target share went to him beyond 20 yards from the line of scrimmage. So he was mostly picking up some of that yardage with yards after catch and a couple of other, not having a ton of catches to really curb that average. But in 2017, things changed. 22.2 yards per catch there. What shifted? Only 27% of his targets came short. 15.9% of his targets came in the intermediate area between 10 to 19 yards of line of scrimmage. 40.6% of his targets came beyond 20 yards of the line of scrimmage. 395 yards on those targets, an average of reception percentage of 35.7 receptions per target, which is good. You're trying to be above a third in that situation when you're being targeted 20 yards downfield. That didn't stop in 2018, by the way. 37.5% of his targets in 2018 went beyond 20 yards of line of scrimmage. So what did Kodi Burns do? Pretty simply with Darius Slayton to turn him into a drafted wide receiver in the NFL in the 5th round to the New York Giants. He started using him where his skill sets most matched his productivity, which was away from the line of scrimmage, deep from the line of scrimmage. This might sound familiar to you because Treyquan Smith, before he was drafted to the New Orleans Saints out of UCF in his final season in 2017, he averaged 19.8 yards per catch. He was seen as a deep threat while he was there. 59 catches for 1,171 yards. That is a guy who now, since he's been in the NFL, has not averaged more than 15.3 yards per reception in his career. And that was his rookie season last year, 11.8 with Jameis Winston, or not really a lot of overlap between the two, actually, because of when the injuries kind of aligned. But with a team that was a little bit more diligent about getting the ball downfield, he's never had more than 448 receiving yards in a season. And this is one of the reasons why I think Treyquan Smith could be back in 2022 is because not much of a market might materialize for him as somebody that has never caught more than 34 passes in his career in a single season and has never exceeded 450 yards receiving in a season. He might be a cheap person to bring back that is still able to give you run blocking ability, but could potentially be developed with Kodi Burns based upon what you saw with Darius Slayton. And I'm not talking about the guy getting $7 million per year like a Cedric Wilson might on the market. He might get more than that, actually. But instead, more like a 1-year prove-it deal to bring him back and give him an opportunity, much like we saw with PJ Williams, right? An opportunity for the New Orleans Saints to try to redefine what he does, what his responsibilities are, and how he contributes as a 3rd or 4th wide receiver, as the Saints will likely be targeting a prototypical Z either in the draft or at least looking for that in free agency. So the reason why I bring this up is because if you look at since Treyquan Smith came into the NFL in 2018, let's go down his averages or percentages in terms of where his target share is. Remember, 19.8 yards per catch in the final year of college. Let's have a little bit of fun. Let's take a look at exactly where those targets were coming from while he was in that last season at UCF. So if we go to that 2017 season, what we'll learn about Treyquan Smith is that the majority of his targets came actually in the short and intermediate area, 39.8, 28.9, and then 28.9 when it came to the deep area, 20 plus yards from the line of scrimmage, with a reception percentage, by the way, of 70.8%. That's absolutely phenomenal. 17 catches on 24 targets beyond 20 yards of the line of scrimmage. So that's just not the role that we've seen from Treyquan Smith in the NFL, however. Only 21.3% of his targets going to the deep area in his rookie season in 2018, of which he caught 40%. In 2019, that dropped to 19.2%. His reception percentage on those dropped to 20%, only 5 targets beyond 20 yards of line of scrimmage. In 2020, that dropped to 9.8%, sub 10%, where he caught 4 of his 5 targets for 3 touchdowns in that area. And then in 2021, just last year, a solemn 14%, 28.6% reception rate down there. So that's where you want to see Treyquan Smith be developed, is as a deep threat. It's what he did in college. It's what the New Orleans Saints drafted him to be, was a prototypical Z receiver. That was his profile coming into the NFL. Maybe Kodi Burns can do just like he did with Darius Slayton, turning him into a draftable product who has now come into the NFL and racked up over 700 yards in 2 straight seasons to begin his career. Last year was a little bit cut short, only 13 games, only 339 yards, dealing with injury. But if you can get Tre'Quan Smith where Darius Slayton's production was in 2019, 2020, 48 catches for 740 yards, 50 catches for 751 yards, respectively, 8 touchdowns to 3 touchdowns in those, you're very happy with what Tre'Quan Smith gives you on a 1-year deal. If he splits the difference between that, if he gets over 500 yards, right, as a 3rd or a 4th wide receiver, as opposed to Darius Slayton, who's serving as basically a number 1 in those seasons. So you adjust for where Tre'Quan Smith would actually be utilized, but you get a more productive Tre'Quan Smith if you start to use him to his strengths, which Kodi Burns seems to have the foresight in terms of what he did with Darius Slayton to be able to generate for the New Orleans Saints. That's the Tre'Quan Smith side, but there are other comparisons that the New Orleans Saints have to some of the receivers that Kodi Burns has worked with in the past. Think about speedsters like Deontay Harris and what he did with Anthony Schwartz. We'll break that down as we continue on with the series over the course of the offseason. And of course, coming up tomorrow, we might be able to get to a little bit more of that, but we're going to have to continue to take a look at the free agency market for the New Orleans Saints. We talked about the options to replace Marcus Williams. Let's take a look at the options to replace Terron Armstead if he ends up walking in free agency as well. And of course, continuing to cover the quarterback conversation around the New Orleans Saints as well. So we've got all that coming up for you here throughout the rest of the week, every single Monday through Friday here on Locked on Saints. Thanks as always for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen today, make sure you go and check out that Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Eric Crocker, Ryan Tracy, killing it over at the show, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. As always, y'all, I appreciate you so much for checking me out, making me a part of your day, making me a part of what you're doing every single day. Glad to be a part of your routine. For everything you need in between these episodes on your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.